Why do stories move us more than statistics? Why do we remember narratives long after we forget the facts? No, that's because, according to communication Walter Fisher, humans are not just rational beings, we are storytelling beings. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart, and today we are exploring Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm, which argues that stories, not arguments alone, are the primary way humans make sense of the world. Let's dig in. Okay, so the core assumptions within this theory start with the idea that humans are homo narrans, or storytelling creatures. And all meaningful communication takes place in the form of a story, or is part of a story. We also assume within this framework that we evaluate stories not just for logic, but their narrative rationality. All right, but what does that mean? So for Fisher, he has two criteria for the ways that we judge stories. First is narrative coherence. Does this story actually make sense internally? Is it consistent and believable? So, for example, a political candidate's life story, does it actually match their public persona? Who they are on the screen, does that match up with who they are behind the cameras and when the cameras aren't there? Then we also have narrative fidelity. Does the story ring true with our current values and lived experiences? For example, a nonprofit's ad whose story feels authentic and aligns with what we already know about the world. So, this narrative rationality gets us in thinking about, does this seem rational? Does this make sense with what I know? So, we don't just weigh arguments about rationality on its own. We look at these stories and how they fit our values. Now, let's think about this idea of stories versus the real world, though, because a big piece of this is we have the rational world paradigm where humans are logical beings and persuasion is based on evidence and reasoning. And we definitely have people that have that paradigm, that framework of ways that they look at the world. And so the rational world is just looking for the logic. Let me see the evidence. Let me be able to analyze that evidence. And if that evidence adds up, that is what the world is. So we kind of think about this in a lot of ways as like capital T truth is going to be this rational, this is logical, this makes sense to me. Then we have the narrative paradigm. And the narrative paradigm really, again, comes to this idea that humans are storytellers, and persuasion is based on good stories that make sense and feel true. They can still scare the bejesus out of us. They can still make us laugh, but they're still stories that ring true to us. It's something that we can connect with. Now, what's really happening is that this shift broadens what counts as persuasive. No longer is it just logical arguments, but instead we're actually looking at compelling narratives within everyday life. So, how does this actually get applied? Well, the narrative paradigm applies really across all sorts of contexts. I've kind of mentioned politics, so we could look at how campaigns frame platforms through personal stories. You could say that you're pro military because you come from a long line of military individuals, and that is going to back up your personal story for why you are voting and acting the way that you are. We can also see this in advertising. Brands are going to use storytelling to connect emotionally to their consumers. Think of any Nike ad, and you'll see emotional appeal about how these shoes helped this athlete push further and go farther than they ever could have before, get more points. And it's because of the brand. And they use the stories of the athletes and that stories of that little girl or little boy that wants to be this professional athlete, and they build on that story. We use stories in law. Attorneys are going to use narratives to persuade the juries. Here's what happened. Let me tell you the tale of why my client couldn't possibly have done the thing because, and here's the story of what happened. But we also do this in everyday life. We explain ourselves through stories. What happened becomes the narrative we share. And I want to take a moment to really think about the impact that these stories have, because the stories that we tell ourselves about what happening, here's the truth. Anne Lamott has it right that typically the first draft of whatever story we create, it's pretty crappy. Brene Brown talks about the shitty first draft, and that's legit as well. The first version of the things that we write, the ideas that we come up with, I don't know about you, but they're way more negative, and they're always built on our emotional response. So it's really important that we even check ourselves and what's the story I'm telling myself. And an example I use with my students all the time is imagine you are waiting for someone on a first or second date and they're late. What's the story you tell yourself when they become, let's say, 15 minutes late? Is it positive? Are you immediately thinking, "Oh, I bet they stopped to get a special gift for me"? Or is your brain flooding you with, "Oh, they backed out. They're not showing up. They're dead in a ditch." What kind of negative story are you coming up with? Because I bet you, hands down, 9 out of 10 of you are going to come up with a negative story about what's happening. And guess what? That's human nature. That is just our bodies protecting us from potential hurt. But we have to take a step back and go, okay, wait a minute. What are the facts? Well, it's 6 o'clock. They might be stuck in some traffic. Right? Maybe they had to stop and get gas. Like, there could be a million and one reasons. What do I know of this person? Well, the last time I talked to them was this afternoon, and they were really excited about our date today. Okay, I'm going to hold that as true, right? But what do I know to be fact? Now, the big piece of this, as I mentioned, this is a first or a second date, so there's a lot of uncertainty, which is going to explain why our bodies and why our brains are coming up with the negative narrative paradigm. Okay, there's so much more that we could say about that, but I'm not going to get into it right now. So let's sum up. First, we have to recognize that we are storytelling creatures. Humans tell stories all the time. We evaluate stories through coherence and fidelity. And narratives shape persuasion, identity, and our sense of community. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart, and this concludes our introductory journey through communication theories that are focused on persuasion. Remember, when in doubt, look for the story, because it's through narratives that we make meaning. Next week, we're going to change into a whole new topic, and I will join you then. In the meantime, keep communicating.